You're on the couch, bowl of cold noodles balanced on your knee, half watching a nature documentary. On screen, a massive black and white animal circles a seal, and the narrator drops his voice. This is a killer whale. You nod. Everyone nods. The whole world has called it that for over a century. The name isn't technically wrong. It's just pointing your brain at the wrong branch of the family tree. The animal you're picturing right now, something slow, blubbery, lumbering through the water, is actually the largest dolphin on the planet. This is the story of a name that got assigned wrong more than 100 years ago, and how that one wrong word has quietly warped the way billions of people picture one of the most socially complex animals in the ocean. An adult male can stretch close to 30 feet and weigh over 10 tons, with a dorsal fin taller than a grown man standing upright. It swims in every ocean on Earth, from the polar ice edges to the equator. No marine mammal has a wider range. And yet almost everything we assume about it comes down to two words stapled together: killer whale. Taxonomically, the killer whale, or Sinus orca, belongs to Delphinidae, the oceanic dolphin family, and it's the largest member of that family by a wide margin. It's more closely related to a bottlenose dolphin than to any baleen whale you've ever seen breach on a nature show. Dolphins are technically toothed whales too, so whale isn't a lie exactly. It's just doing a lot of misleading work. The most repeated explanation for the name goes like this. Centuries ago, sailors watched these animals take down real whales, animals many times their own size, and started calling them whale killers. Somewhere along the way, the phrase flipped, and the backwards version, killer whale, is the one that stuck. It's a mislabel with real consequences. It puts the wrong folder in your head. Whale makes you think slow, gentle, filtering plankton through baleen plates. It does not make you think of an animal with distinct cultures, distinct dialects, and entire populations that stay socially and reproductively separate from another population occupying the exact same water. So what is this thing, actually? Scientists sort killer whale populations into what they call ecotypes. That's not just an administrative label. Each ecotype eats a completely different diet, speaks a different set of sounds, and shows little evidence of interbreeding with a neighboring ecotype, even when two groups are swimming past each other in the same strait on the same afternoon. Take the North Pacific. There's a population called residents. They eat almost exclusively fish, mostly Chinook salmon, and will essentially never touch a seal. Then there's Biggs, also called transients. They hunt almost nothing but marine mammals, seals, sea lions, occasionally a young whale. These two groups can pass within a few hundred yards of each other in the same afternoon and act like the other one doesn't exist. That sounds like a dietary preference. Here's where it stops being one. Genetic analysis puts the split between the Biggs lineage and other killer whale lineages at somewhere between 250,000 and 350,000 years ago. Hundreds of thousands of years of separate evolutionary history, while the two groups kept occupying some of the same waters. That's long enough that in 2024, a team of researchers proposed elevating Biggs and residents to full separate species. The scientific committee that rules on marine mammal names didn't quite go that far. They landed on subspecies instead, one step short. But even that is a big deal for animals that look nearly identical side by side. That's not a difference in taste. Diet, learned behavior, mate choice, and generations of staying apart appear to have reinforced each other, hardening a cultural split into a genetic one. There's a layer under that one you'd never catch just from a gene chart: sound. Resident killer whales in the North Pacific each produce their own set of what researchers call discrete calls, distinguishable on a spectrogram the same way you'd recognize a regional accent over the phone. Scientists call this repertoire a dialect. Closely related pods share more of it. Distant pods can sound dramatically different, even to a human eye reading the same spectrogram. Nothing forces them to sound this way. They learn it, the same way a kid raised in one region ends up sounding like that region without ever being taught to. There's a detail hiding inside that dialect fact that's worth sitting with for a second. In most mammal species, young animals leave the group they were born into once they're grown. That's just how you avoid inbreeding and competition with your own parents. Resident killer whales don't do that. Sons and daughters stay with their mother for her entire life, and often for theirs too. An adult male killer whale, fully grown, capable of hunting on his own, will still be swimming next to his mother decades later. That's not weakness. It's the whole reason the dialect exists in the first place. You can only inherit a family accent if you never actually leave the family. And that culture gets taught. It isn't hardwired. Off Punta Norte, on Argentina's Peninsula Valdez, there's a small population of killer whales that does something almost no other population on Earth does. They deliberately throw their own bodies onto the beach to grab sea lion pups practicing their swimming near shore. It's genuinely dangerous. Miscalculate the angle even slightly, and a multi-ton animal can end up truly stranded and die on the sand. The behavior has been documented there since the mid-1970s. Young whales learn it gradually, by following experienced hunters, and even now, only some individuals in the population ever fully master it, the way not every kid who watches a skateboarder actually lands the trick. This is where the tidy story starts to crack, because if you think of this animal as a whale, you picture something running on pure instinct, the same hardwired hunting pattern, coded into its genes, repeated forever. But what's happening at Punta Norte isn't instinct, it's social learning, the same basic mechanism that lets a kid learn to tie their shoes by watching a parent do it. Except here the reward is a meal, and the cost of getting it wrong is death. And this is where it gets stranger still. Killer whales are one of only about 6 known species where females go through menopause, where reproduction stops decades before life does. Humans are one of the others. A few other toothed whales are too. Most mammals, elephants included, keep reproducing nearly to the end of life. Female killer whales often stop reproducing sometime in their 40s, yet some live into their 80s or 90s. That can mean decades of life after the calves stop coming, a stretch of time longer than most human careers. Why would evolution hang on to something that looks, on its face, wasteful? Researchers at the University of Exeter argue the answer is family structure. In a pod organized around mothers, the older a female gets, the more closely related she becomes to everyone around her. If she keeps having calves, she's competing for food with her own grandchildren. But if she stops reproducing and spends that time leading the group to salmon, keeping her adult sons closer and out of fights that could get them hurt, and passing on decades of accumulated knowledge, her genes still spread, just indirectly, through the survival of the next generation. In other words, the oldest females in a pod aren't dead weight waiting things out. They're the group's living memory. Long-term tracking studies have found that when an older female dies, her grandcalves' risk of death rises noticeably in the following 2 years. A simple hunting machine, running purely on instinct, doesn't need a grandmother. A society does. At this point, you might want to rip up the name tag on the entire family tree. Hold on, though. To be fair, the picture isn't perfectly tidy. Not every killer whale population is as well studied as the ones off the Pacific Northwest or Antarctica. The offshore ecotype, which specializes in sharks and rays, is still poorly understood because it lives far from shore and gets observed rarely. Researchers have even found their teeth worn flat, likely from grinding through shark skin, a clue about a diet nobody watched them eat for years. Whether Biggs and residents eventually get bumped up to full species is still an open question, still short 1 vote. But there's one thing almost nobody disputes. Despite carrying the most menacing name in the entire ocean, and despite being one of the most capable predators that has ever existed, there is no reliable record of a killer whale ever killing a human being in the wild. You look back at the screen. The narrator is still calling it a killer whale, but the name sounds too small now. Not because the animal is less dangerous than advertised, but because it's far more complicated. A giant dolphin that stays with its mother for life, speaks in its family's own dialect, teaches its young hunting techniques that can cost you your life if you get them wrong, and keeps its oldest, post-reproductive females around for one reason: to lead everyone else home.